The inside is just a horror show of holes everywhere around the jacking point. I don't need to tell you that these shadows are all metal that's missing. You can see right into the inside structure. Here's the start of another BMW E39 sill and jacking point repair on this M5. So it's quite a rare colour, royal red 390. Never seen one in this colour before. It looks incredible. And it's got 155,000 miles on the odometer, which has also been owned by the same owner for the last 12 years, which is excellent. However, I think a little bit of corrosion's been setting in because it's got the typical yellow chalk lines that you sometimes get from an MOT tester, and it's failed its annual MOT inspection in the UK because there's a hole here which is within 30 centimetres of structural jack point. That's the jacking point there. Fuel tank is just here, so it's apparently had some form of welding repair before carried out on the underside where these jacking points are, but possibly not up into the fuel tank area. But interestingly, it's failed on the outer point, so we're not sure exactly what we're going to find. We'll see once we get it up in the air. Let's get it into the workshop and have an assessment. Well, after that initial inspection outside in the car park, which was very brief, we could see that there was a hole present. Now we're looking at it from a different angle. You can see, yeah, it's pretty bad. It's not just a hole. Normally the rule of thumb is about 10% of what you see is actually what you see is about 10%. 90% of it is normally hidden behind seam sealer, filler, other repairs, things like that. So we'll see how this turns out. We have heard that from the owner that the car's had work in this area before, about 4 to 5 years ago, I think the story goes, and it's had some basic repairs, but not anything up in this side, probably because the tank stayed in, I would imagine, and nobody wanted to do the welding process, which I don't blame them, without taking the tank out. So we think it's had some work on the outside, maybe not up on this vertical section here. There's a ledge here which is also horizontal. We've got multiple layers of metal that have exposed, corroding and just breaking off. That's part of the chassis there that's just breaking, but it's the holes in here which are the real problem. That shadowing is where the vertical part of the inner sill has broken away, and this is the reinforcement part of the jacking point. But I think the worst side is the left hand side, even though on the outer part on first looks it looks original, but when you actually get a bit closer it's not. I think this is filler because there's some weird shapes and sudden stops. I think this is a smoothed bit of filler here because there's also a bit of a bulbous bit, and then the corrosion is breaking through. So on the initial inspection it looks good on the outside, but when you get onto the inside you can see the yellow chalk is signifying where the MOT tester has failed the hole in this area, and then you look a bit higher and you see that jagged cut line and you think, well, what's that? Well, I'm willing to be proved wrong, but I think we'll see when we get this taken apart that you'll probably find that might be an original part of the inner sill from BMW. Certainly looks like it at this point, and this piece, the piece that's ironically failed again, is a replacement bit that's just been pushed up there that hasn't been welded, bonded, sealed, so it's just been open for supposedly 4 or 5 years and is failed. So it must have been cheaper metal than the BMW system uses from factory, because it's gone again. But moving away from the seal and the jacking point, we've then got a hole in the floor pan of the vehicle, which isn't usual, nor is it good news at all, because now we're in a different area. We're in an area which goes into the cabin, because that foam-like compressible piece I'm pushing there is the back of the carpet, which is not only wet but also a huge fire risk. So now the car needs to go into a separate part of the repair process, rather than just staying outside of the car and tank out and things like that, axle out maybe. It's now going to have an interior strip out, because we've got carpet here which 1 needs drying out, 2 needs removing, and 3 needs fabrication work because part of the floor pan is going to have to be cut out and re-engineered. So quite a lot to do, and more so than initially thought. So what that does show sometimes is having an initial repair, or having a go, or a cheaper sort of alternative route isn't always the best method, because if it's not done right with specialist techniques and processes and knowledge of the vehicles, you can find yourself in a position like this where 4 or 5 years later it fails, causes more issue, and then has to be done again. So in the long run it probably costs more money than just doing it right in the first place. So let's start the strip down process and see what we find. So stripped down, we've got the fuel tank out, the exhaust system off, prop shaft off, handbrake cables disconnected, and we get to see the horrors that are presenting us with not exactly what we wanted to see. We already knew it was going to be a bit of a bad one if it's got corrosion on the outside. That's not that common. But the inside is just a horror show of holes everywhere around the jacking point. I don't need to tell you that these shadows are all metal that's missing. You can see right into the inside structure. There's the 2mm jacking point reinforcement piece, which we don't know if that yet will survive. You can't buy that bit, so hopefully it will. The outside metalwork is pretty thin. That's the end of the sill panel. Apparently it's had work before. I think there's a weld line just along there. Might be filler, I'm not sure. We'll find out when we discover what's going on. The sills have been painted underneath, so I think it has had some work. The story goes that it had work about 4 or 5 years ago, specifically the left-hand side. So what we were looking at earlier, this weird jagged line, which is where the old inner sill, this piece here, just been cut off, a little bit crudely, and then a bit of old sort of recycled washing machine metal has been placed in there, just tucked under behind. And ironically, it's that new metal which is corroded and hold itself. So after about 4 or 5 years, no protection, no external seam sealer or joins, anything like that, no cavity wax in sight, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened like this. Things like this don't sort of happen after a few years worth of work. This is new metal, not BMW. There's the filler. We've been hammering that just to sort of show that underneath there is white filler, and there's the filler line. A couple of little weld blobs as well. So it's had something joined in on this side, which is what we're exposing for the first time. It's going to be an interesting one because we've got somebody else's repair work to sort of unpick and unstitch and then start the fabrication process on all new metalwork. But we've also got the hole in the floor pan, and like I said before, there's the poor chap's carpet, which is also damp, which is why the car is probably been a little bit steaming up. So all these things can go on unnoticed underneath the vehicle. You think if you only see the car during sort of MOT test time and the 4-post lifts are on here, you don't get to see all of this very easily. The 4-post lifts are more than a foot wide, the run-on track, so sometimes all of this area here is unexposed. And yes, an MOT tester should be checking for structural soundness, but when you see something that's probably just a bit corroded, I think you can tap it, but if it doesn't hole itself, it's okay to pass. But it gets to a point where the holes suddenly develop when you start tapping them, which is why this car has now failed its MOT, and some tapping has pursued and found lots and lots of rust, which isn't just on the horizontal face underneath the car. We've got a vertical bulkhead here, and this is going to be chased all the way up there, I bet, underneath this black paint and going around here. This is all paint after it's left the factory. This black paint here, which is all to do with this inner sort of seal repair work. Yeah, not sure really you can call it a repair, but that sort of paint has been sort of applied in this area, but all it's done is gone over corrosion, so the corrosion still lives underneath the paint and carries on corroding. And look at that, that's a fuel vapor pipe. Luckily not carrying fuel. These are the high pressure and the return fuel pipes that go from the tank to the engine and vice versa, but this is carrying fuel vapor either to the carbon canister or to the engine to neutralize it. So corroded, it's got a hole in it. Unbelievable how thin that is. So lots of work cut out on this one, pardon the pun. Let's get cutting and get it cut out. Fast forward a day or so and progress is being made nicely. You don't very often get to see an E39 like that. We've had to move the lifting arm onto a structural point of the end of the chassis leg here to hold the vehicle up, because obviously with the arm being here on the jacking point, we can't actually access it or get to any work to cut it out. So this is the very first initial sort of cuts on the vertical section. Remember, we had to get rid of somebody's old piece that they'd pushed up in there, and then also the jaggedly cut original one that had finished. We've also got, you can see weld lines here where somebody's welded a new piece onto the outside. We'll go into that later on. You've got terrible corrosion on this 2mm structural point. This is the really thick piece which actually takes the load. When you jack the car up, it spreads the load up into the inner sill and the outer sill, and obviously the sort of rear door shut area. Now we've got lots still to cut out. We've got affected areas on the bottom of the wheel arch panel just here, but what we are doing is just systematically cutting away and taking out the bad affected areas. We've already done the inside of the car, so that's a good stage. We went into the hardest part of the job first. The interior strip, the carpet removal process, and then the fabrication, the cutout of, and then the new fabrication of some steel, which is still partly, it's in a stabilized graphene primer at the moment, just to make sure it doesn't haze or corrode in the atmosphere every time we go home for the night and leave it for sort of 12 hours or so. That will be finished off, and we've got a blend-in line. So we've got nice structural floor pan again, and that's going to be lapped into the seal section that we're going to have to put up through here. Had to go a fair way. Normally it's just around these jacking points that are bad. So we've still got to cut out some of this area because we've got filler and corrosion in here. We've also got a weld line, remember, somewhere about there, which suggests that the last person that did it is welded probably all the way up to the top. So we're not sure exactly what we're going to find yet, but what we do need to do is get all of this corrosion out. So it might mean actually cutting the jacking point section out and then working that in a media blasting tank just to get all the pitted corrosion out of it. If it survives, if it's too thin, then we'll have to make that section as well. But you can see what's going on when we get rid of the corrosion, then it's painted, and then work our way through different stages. So that's the inner section of the left hand side. Right hand side is still exactly the same. We haven't started tackling that yet. That gives you an idea of the sort of horrors that we're dealing with, and when more comes we'll update some further work. So starting to look a lot more structural now. We've got the lower piece in. We use new sill panels. Now we don't make up pieces, apart from the fact that the BMW sill panels, if you've seen our other E39 sill videos, the sill panels from BMW are about £2,000 for the whole length, which is the only way you can get the rear section. So as most people I think will do, they go for the aftermarket sill panel. So that's an E39 aftermarket sill panel. That's the section that we've cut out that we've needed there. So we are using new pieces. We've also got the vertical section now grafted in, and you can see some of the penetration lines. Those there are really good penetration marks for the plug welding effect that we've done on the stamped and reinforcement piece of the jacking point. Remember, we looked at that earlier and saw how wobbly it was when it wasn't connected to anything like the inner and the lower seal section. Now that's plug welded there and also under here. Also it's been plugged all the way along this side because this section up here, which is the vertical, like the inner seal, actually turns a 90 degree and laps down. You might just be able to see the join lines there, which is how they are from factory, and it's plugged through all here, but then we just belt sand these off to make them smooth for later on then when we go into the protection stage. Now we still need to work on this area in here. This is why this one's peeled open. This is somebody else's last attempt, and what they've done is welded in. There's their weld line just there, and they've welded in all the way up there, which we've taken off the filler and got back to bright metal quite quickly, which is good news. So although it was corroding, we've cut out the section that was badly corroding and then obviously used new metal from the seal panels that we just showed, and there's our join line there. It's just tacked in place at the moment to show the fit up, and we've had to go a fair way down. It's all the way down to there at the moment. The welds still need linishing once we've done our weld fully, and then obviously integrates into that new piece that we've got inside the floor pan where the carpet is. So get in there, and now we're going to work on this left hand side rear piece where it goes into the wheel arch area. So we've now moved on to the right hand side, and Dave's done a good job of cutting out the problematic, remember how much holes there were in this lower section. We exposed the inner jacking structure, which again is wobbly until it's tied in and plug welded to the vertical section and the horizontal underneath. The inner sill, which is this one here, has been trimmed back as well, but then you see another join, which is a factory overlapping panel. Look at the corrosion under there. Like, where do you stop? How far do you want to go? That's the question that we pose to, I think, a lot of people. That's an entirely separate panel, which is the very front edge of the rear axle carrier panel. When it comes down to just strengthen that load of the axle mounting points, sends it into a load of other panels, and that is very trapped and pitted. That's not only just the bracket, but actually underneath there. So I need to discuss that. More corrosion still to take out. We've got an inner structure there with a bit of foam. We can also see the welding line where the last company have put a new outer corner on. There's the weld line, which isn't protected. It's bare metal. It's rusting, which proves it hasn't got any cavity wax in there. I think somebody's had a go at putting some black Schultz in there, but they've missed it. There's black Schultz there, but it's missed the welding line because the welding line is starting to corrode. And look at this line going up here. This is the original seal from BMW. This is the aftermarket one, this black one. You can just see the overlapping nature. So from there to there is where they've overlapped the panel. And then as you go up higher, you can see a bit more of that overlapping nature. Now, traditionally, you would do a butt weld, because what you don't want is metal overlapping if you can help it, because corrosion will develop under there, especially if it hasn't used weld through primer or got any cavity wax or paint on the inside, which I don't think it has, because otherwise we won't be seeing this corrosion level in here. They've also done the outer bit, and where they've sort of finished it and lapped it, it's all very much jagged and rusting. It hasn't really solved the issue. If it was done 4 or 5 years ago, it's, you know, failed quite quickly after. I suppose the only saving grace is that we're able to find good clean metal without going too high up into the painted area. We're still actually at the moment on the black stone chip area, and if we can keep it under there, that's even better, because it means it's more cost effective to the owner, because then he might not have to go to a body shop to have actual body colour paint. It might be able to stay under that line, because we haven't found any more obvious corrosion yet. So we've still got to clean all the cavities out and work out exactly what can stay and what's got to be refabricated, and then use the new sill panels to start protecting those and re-welding them back in. Well, the left-hand side's looking a lot more substantial now. We've got it in a graphene primer and a high build primer, and we just put our first stage of brushable seam sealer on. This is going to get a sprayable seam sealer like we do on all of ours, but we just go over weld lines, joins, panel edges with a brushable seam sealer first, and then later on that will get protected. Started working on the right-hand side, so internal section, as you saw on the last video, had been exposed and opened up. We've cleaned out all of the inner sill section up here and painted that with a weld-through primer. We can see the overlapping stage of the last person's repair. There's their panel which goes up there. They did from there to the outside of there, and it looks like it's had possibly arches all the way around as well. We're just starting our plug weld method. We've reintroduced a new section of inner sill which has got a right angle return just here, and that has obviously been welded to the factory inner sill here, our new one here, and it's welded all around the perimeter and also on the inside as well. So you've got 2 layers of weld. You've got one which is on the outside, one which is on this side facing in, which is an overlap, so it's a stronger sort of connection in a way, an area where you want some stability, because if you're jacking up the quarter weight of an E39, you want to make sure that these things, which I was showing you earlier, were very wobbly when they weren't connected to the inner sill and then the lower sill panel. You want those to be stable and connected. So we've got the plug welds, 4 of them going through that way, and then just making up the underside section now, and then of the section of the brand new sill panels that we use, making up in terms of where it's going to land, because it comes up to a certain section, and then we've got another area up here which has got to be filled in. That will be plug welded in 4 places minimum on the underside as well, which stabilizes it quite nicely. And that's just one of the stages that we go through during the initial sort of rebuilding phase of the E39 inner sills and jacking points. So a little bit of prep work, just protecting areas that we don't want to get any seam sealer on. Remember, this isn't a restoration, so it doesn't have to be to the protection standards from where we would normally do things. This is a localized paint / sealer repair. It's the rear sill end panels and the underside parts which would conform as part of the jacking point structure. We've got 2 repairs going on here. We've got a previous repair, as we've seen throughout this process, welded vertical line where the end of the rear seal has been replaced and is not corroding internally, but and then also it turns out the wheel arches have been replaced. We've been able to see that from the inside edge. So we've had to do our work on top of somebody else's work, but we've cutting out their bad work, if that makes sense. If you've been following the whole way through the story, that would have made sense. So the interaction and where our weld lines are just about visible there through the paint. This is a high build primer. It has a graphene primer first, then a high build primer. But the good thing is once we put our sprayable seam sealer on, which is coming up next, that's going to hide that sort of line up there. And plus you've got running board protection covers that go down this section, which go and cover some of the join lines. So there's where our interaction join line is. There's the left rear floor pan that Dave's crafted in, because there was a hole in the floor pan there and the original carpet was able to be touched and it was damp inside. So that's left hand side sorted out. The inner structure, we use a thicker steel on the inside because what we don't want is any further weakness to the jacking point structure. They are really flimsy. You saw that in the video clip. I could move that once it was cut away and open. So we use a thick steel up here. So it is a complication process going from a thick steel, something like a 2mm steel, to sometimes a 0.75 or even a 1mm, which is like the inner stamped pieces of the inner wheel arch on this side and the inner seal up on this section. But we've got our weld line down there, which arguably doesn't really need blending down, linishing down. They can do if somebody wanted to have them near invisible, we could do. We've got the plug welds there which are holding it in, 4 plug welds which have been flattened down because we know we need to get the BMW jacking blocks up in that section. This little area up here had to be rebuilt on this edge because this had all gone, so we've got a new piece on that side as well. They're blended in and plug welded to each other, so you've got return right angles at the bottom. We've drilled the holes, done a dry test fit with the wheel arch liners, which then give us the hole locations for drilling to make sure that the speed clips and the self-tapping screws are going to line up, because the wheel arch liners are connected to the back of the lower sill panel. And then again on the right hand side we've got the new inner sections, which are fairly heavy, thick steel compared to the inner stuff. That's not going to rot out, nor is it going to give any weaknesses where these collapse, which sometimes they do. They crease upwards and inboard. And now if you think how thick that is, I'm not claiming it to be something like 5 minutes, like a 2mm plate, but it's a lot stronger. And in a vertical plane, it's extremely strong, and it's directly above where you want it, above the jacking point, where you're lifting the weight of a BMW 5 Series, or you're sharing the corner load weight of a 5 Series, plug welded in there and on the underside as well. And then it's connected down on the underside and blended in somewhere. Can't even see it, just there's the line, which will be lost when we do our sprayable seam sealer. Remember, this isn't how we finish, this is just prep stage. So it's got a graphene primer and a high build primer. Some of it's had a brushable seam sealer over the weld lines and the join lines and the panel laps, because you don't want water getting in there. And when you're doing a sprayable seam sealer, you're doing a general protection, but sometimes you can't always get every single line in one go without it forcing under high air pressure the sealant into odd looks. So what we do is a brush stroke first to try and make sure all gaps are filled, and then we come along and do the sprayable stuff, which is what we're preparing for now. So that's where we are with the inner structures, rebuilt, strengthened, repaired, all connected, and now we need to get on and blend them in with the sprayable seam sealer. So there's what it looks like from the outside. Now we've had to put a little bit of extra black textured paint in to fill in the areas that we've worked on in this sort of region. But the good news is we didn't have to go into the painted area. Quite often we have to go up higher to remove corrosion, but because somebody's done that bit before, they've gone all the way up there and replaced wheel arches, there wasn't any corrosion high up in the coloured paint. So we've just finished and matched the textured black paint that was all the way down the car. We've just carried it on, and so it looks nice and presentable and smart from this area. Done a little bit of dusting of black paint coming underneath the vehicle from the outside, just going in. All that black was under their factory, well, not factory, but somebody had put that there before, so we've just carried that sort of colour scheme on and just dusted a little bit underneath and tried to fade it out a little bit. So that's what it looks like from the inside, the structural work. Now it's got the seam sealer on, which, like I say, is going to stand out because it's against the car that's got natural road grime and film on it for the last 20 years. You can't really hide that sort of stuff, but what you can be assured with, it's a completely dry, textured system, which is waterproof and weather tight over all the lapping areas of panel joints and new pieces that have been put in. And what we're going to do now is go into the cavity waxing stage. So I'll just show you, whilst we're setting up for the cavity waxing, just show you the right hand side as well, which is all finished and blended. You can't really see any of the join lines. There would have been a weld line somewhere around this area, I forget even where it was now, but it's a nice finish. And once the plastic protectors are on, you won't really see that much has gone on in this area. So good outcome, nice strong structural work, which will just blend in over the years of the sort of road grime and dirt and film and mud that gets sprung up under cars. So what we're going to do now is cavity waxing, protect the internal sections. So we've got a nice injection wand here, it's about 1/2 metre, and what that'll do is send cavity wax into the internal sections. And it's got a 360-degree fan head, so it doesn't just shoot it out in that direction, it actually coats in a circle, and what that's doing is contacting all of the inside sections, whether they be vertical, horizontal, different shapes, and it will start draining out of the natural holes, which on the underside of an E39 are basically just the clipping points where the sill plastic covers go in, so we can see it's coming out there. We'll probably do lots of that over the course of the next half an hour or so, just making sure we're waxing as much as we can on the areas that we've worked, because naturally during the process of putting new metal in, you'll always have a weld through primer behind on the contact points. That's constant, and that has to be done, which we do. But there's always areas that aren't going to be as protected on the inside as they are on the outside, because you simply cannot get sprayable seam sealer onto the inside of every cavity because it's a closed box section, and that's where cavity injection, cavity waxing comes into play. So that coats the inside, so you've got an inside protection layer, an outside protection layer. You've created an environment environment where corrosion is very unlikely to grow, especially because of a waxy set inside. And what we'll do is go through these individual holes as well, just to make sure we can get enough cavity wax through there. And if there's any other areas that we can help the car with whilst we're here, behind brackets and just other little areas to slow corrosion down, then we will do so. So even though we haven't worked down on this end of the sill, we're still cavity waxing it. Why not? We've got the running board, plastic covers off, we can get the nozzles in. It makes sense to get some extra protection in this car just to give it a helping hand whilst we're here. So time to rebuild the underside of the M5. This is how you rebuild one properly with all new genuine BMW parts. We go a bit over the top sometimes, but actually no, I wouldn't say it's over the top. This installs reliability back in the car using genuine BMW fixings, nuts and bolts, rather than sort of random bits of self-tappers and cable ties, which some places do. That's what makes causes the cars to fall into disrepair and have premature failures, whereas you put BMW genuine original bits on, the manufacturer who designed and made the car, they've got longevity in mind. So yes, they might be expensive to get the correct gasket for the end of the prop shaft to stop the grease coming out, or might be expensive to get to the toe eccentric bolt, but yeah, it's going to work, isn't it? First time, every time. Look at that fixing, bag of fixings. Love that sort of stuff. If you're anything like us, this is all the stuff we had in stock, all specific to the E39. There's the special clips for the lambda probe wiring on the heat shield. There's the special clips for the under trays. They have screw twist clips on the under trays. Heat shield fixings, brake pipe joiners, it's all there. Along with all this new stuff that's just coming from BMW this morning. So we've got more Jubilee clips for the fuel tank system. We've got some eccentric toe bolts there for the rear camber bolts. We've got all the brake pipe and the fuel pipe special clips. All those are always rusted on people's cars, including this one. They're meant to be a little crosshead screw, but it's just full of rust. So those normally end up snapping off in the chassis. So sometimes it's not even worth trying. Sometimes you just bend those over and replace them. We'll see what happens on this car. We've got aquaplane guards, we've got the CV grease for the end of the CV. The CV's been replaced on the prop, but it's pretty much dry, so we're putting new that comes from BMW. I mean, when you can buy the CV joint from BMW under part number and the grease, why do people just buy the CV? I mean, you might as well have the whole lot and do it all nicely. Jacking points for them, there's the brake pipe clips. Some of the bolts and nuts for the fixing, for the chassis fixings where the rear axle bolts together, and brake pipe clips. Literally everything you could possibly want to do a good job. The heat shield was missing on the centre section of the tunnel, so new one of those from BMW. New one of these. This is regularly required on the E46s and the E39s nowadays, because unfortunately the cars are of an age where corrosion sets in. This bit is just full of corrosion and does not allow you to press that special tool, which is the floating clip to depress that. It's a high pressure fuel pipe that comes from the tank to the underside stainless steel one, and that was sea solid, so that had to be broken to get it off the car. So new one of those is required, as was this piece, which is the fuel vent pipe. We saw that one, how corroded that was, where I sort of bent it and it was actually a hole in it. That's the new one that comes. And then also brake pipes. Somebody put copper brake pipes on there, made a very poor repair of it. They were all over the place, massively wobbly. They were also seized at the unions because nobody put wax on them. So the best thing to do is just start again. Genuine BMW ones. They're made of steel, which is excellent regardless of what anybody says, because they are plastic coated. And as long as you wax them, that's the key. As long as you wax them at the ends, on the fixings, and also the entire length of them, they will stay good for 20 plus years. Honestly, these are great. We've been using them since we started restoring cars in 2005. We do not have problems with them. I appreciate that people love copper because it doesn't corrode, but yeah, it does because it goes green. And the fixings on the end of copper ones are steel, made of steel. And if they're not protected, which most people don't even think about, when you come to undo them, they just twist the copper, and because the copper's more fragile than steel, it just splits the copper one. So like this car. This car's had copper brake pipes, but they split on removal because they were seized at the union. So anyway, that's all the new bits that are going into the M5 rebuild, making it stronger and better and last longer. So right hand side's gone back together, and we've got the fuel tank in. You can't actually see a great amount of it. Plastic covers are on. What we have done is replace the brake pipes, because the old copper ones, well, we've been through it on the last video clip. New genuine BMW ones that come all the way down. Look how nice and parallel they are, with new clipping points as well, and tidied up with the spacers as well. Nice and original, not touching the chassis, not touching each other, and then they snake off around the front of the axle and then go across one to the right hand side, flexi up there, and then one to the left. Left hand side is going back together as well with the undershield on. We've put the new pipe on the clip here on the fuel tank. Well, we put it onto the top of the fuel tank before we fit the fuel tank, and then we need to put it on top of these two once we're finished with the work. New Jubilee clip will go on there, new clipping pipe up there, and the vent hose has been replaced. Now these ones, we're just waiting for these clips to come in from BMW, but look at the struggle we're going to have with these. This is quite common nowadays for these. I showed you in the new ones what they look like. They were just sort of cross-headed fixings that come captive inside this metal clipping point, and they are just full of corrosion, as in you can't even get a fixing in there. They're most likely going to snap because there's something like M4 thread, so we just got to work out what to do on those. It might be that if they don't come undone, we've got to do this solution, which is just lever the piece of metal out to allow the old pipe to come out and therefore the new one to go in, and they might just have to stay there. It really depends on how badly they are to undo, but anyway, we're working through that. That's what the yellow cable ties are for, to tell us that that area is not finished. New heat shield on the center. Not too much longer now, and I think things will be completed and back together fully. That's all the work finished now on this E39 M5, fully rebuilt. It's just had its wheel alignment processed. In doing so, we had to change all the camber bolts. They were terribly corroded, as they commonly do. They're a special eccentric bolt with a washer, which has to be renewed to get and achieve a correct wheel alignment. We also changed the toe bolts as well, greased them with a nickel anti-seize paste as well, so they won't suffer again. Also, this car was suffering with the lower H-arm inner bushes that had sort of started separating, not fully collapsed, but they'd been coming up on the MOT test advisory notes for several times, so this owner supplied us Powerflex ones to install. Now they go in two halves on these rearward ones, and these forward ones are a one-piece one. They're terrible work to get in, very hard. You have to take the entire arm off, press the old bushes out, and then press these ones in. Quite a lot of effort, but they have gone in nicely. We renewed all the bolts as well, and the lock plate as well. That's the same for the right hand side. New eccentric system there for adjustment of the camber, new eccentric bolts up there, and washers for the toe adjustment. The system down here is all new bolts wise, and the Powerflex bushes. One drop link, we noticed the dust boot was broken, so renewed that one and the fixings as well. So that's allowed the wheel alignment process to go smoothly. Also replaced a few bolts during the process. That one was missing when it came in, and that one was as well, so it's had new ones there. There was a heat shield that was missing, so that's been installed, and also the clipping points here for the Lambda Pro wiring, because these were hanging down, so we've got the correct BMW clips. Luke's going to cover those with a protective wax now, which is transparent. Well, it goes on white, but it does dry transparent. What that does is just protects things from water, salts and elements, especially when it's a bare component, bare aluminium, bare steel fixings. Everywhere we work, we try our best to protect things with longevity in mind. We don't want them just to last for a couple of years. We want things to last for a long time. So that's what the finished effect is on the right hand side. All new inner structure, as we saw on the last video update. Brake pipes as well, front to rear, with all new clipping points, and then the plastic covers are on with a nice weatherproof protection, e-coat finish colouring, lots of cavity waxing inside as well, so it's all flooded and made sure that you've got an internal and external protection. New aquaplane guards, the correct 149 rivets, the correct sealing clips and self-tapping screws there. Same with the left hand side, looking very smart, very straight, very structurally strong, with again aquaplane guards. New fixings for the fuel tank as well, the fuel pipes on this side, renewed the special high pressure one, the vent one, the clip, the Jubilee clip, all the special clipping points down the left hand side. It's just a really nice job. It's come together very well. The owner had already put on new the new exhaust clamps as well, so they're done. When it came in, the under tray was hanging off, or it's cable tied on, and it was quite low and bowing, so we've put the BMW correct twist clips on with the special C clips at the back as well. There was a tie rod that the owner supplied which wanted putting on, so we've put a new tie rod on that they supplied, and then that allowed us to carry out the wheel alignment, but not before we unseized the centre, the left one as well, and then put some nickel anti-seize grease in the splines between the male and the female section in there to stop it seizing again. And I'm just working our way through anywhere that is new and fresh metal, just giving it a wax protection just to make sure it's all in good order. So that's the underside completed. Give you a look from the outside as well, show you what it looks like. Nice original finish. Luckily we didn't need to go into the painted section, so it just blends in quite nicely. New jacking points as well. That's the right hand side, and the left hand side is faring nicely as well. So if you've got an E39 or something similar with seal corrosion, jacking point problems, holes, surface corrosion, or you're just a little bit worried about it, do give us a call here at Reedish and we'll be able to help you out.